everyone. I can't see people, but I understand that there's quite a lot of you in the webinar stream already. So welcome to Activate 2025. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Corey McLeod. I'm the publisher of InnovationAus.com. Also on this webinar, we have our editorial director, James Riley, editor, Justin Hendry, and the managing director of Innovation Aus, Kath Arnott, who will be sort of chipping in at various points. We've really tried to structure this to provide an overview of 2025 and a little bit of history and context of Innovation Aus in the first 15 minutes, but really give a lot of time for people to ask questions, particularly of the editorial team. I know that that's something, an opportunity that doesn't happen very often in a format like this, so we've made sure that we've set aside plenty of time. You will have an opportunity to ask the questions in the Q&A box that you'll see just at the bottom of the screen, and we will pause at the end of every slide just to address them, and Kath will help facilitate that. So without further ado, we'll kick off. So this is just to give you an idea of how we've structured it about InnovationAus.com, how we're different, 2025 focus and offerings, and then the earned media insights and a Q&A with our editorial team. So I really do encourage you to kind of get some questions ready for Justin and James. I know Innovation Aus can be an unusual beast in thinking about how you might pitch and what you might pitch and when you might pitch it, and this is your opportunity to interrogate them. So please have those questions ready. Justin and James are ready to tackle them. Okay, next. Just a little snapshot. Espresso Communications launched 2004, as many of you know, and in 2014, InnovationAus.com was launched. I'm going to say with about 200 LinkedIn friends and family followers. It was a little passion project of James's, and we set about trying to grow that and see if we could purposely build an audience of people who were interested in industry development reporting at a time when there were a lot of jobs coming out of the mainstream media that had significant reporting resources in that space. So I don't know if many of you kind of remember back then Innovation Aus, but we've had you'll have seen lots of bylines over the years of really senior reporting, and we've tried to maintain that reporting and that focus over 9 years, which will be 10 years next year. Oh, actually, 2015 we launched the publication. The LinkedIn started in 2014. Some of the bigger things that you will have seen over the years is the Innovation Aus Awards for Excellence that started in 2021. I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but it was the day after New South Wales opened post-COVID. It was a very chatty affair, I'm going to say. Look, a very social occasion, which was a really kind of nice way to burst out of COVID. Barangaroo was the second year, Hordern Pavilion in 2023, and then the venue in 2024. One thing that you will notice about Innovation Aus and what we try to do is kind of surprise people with the location, with the creative around the awards and our significant events. We really want to take the things that we write about and the areas that we focus on and really shine a new light on the way that we tell those stories, particularly via the events. So that's kind of part of our DNA and part of what you'll probably notice if you think back, particularly over those 4 awards. From starting from that very small group of family and friends through to 76,000 unique monthly views. So we'll talk more about the data and the readership as we go on, but that's the journey of 9 years, and we're looking forward to 10 years next year. Okay. That's a snapshot of our audience. Those numbers we started was very sort of heavily dependent on the newsletter that is 5 days a week. It comes out at about 7 o'clock, almost on the dot, Justin and James. What we are seeing though is that traffic's coming from a much more varied range of places, from across socials, people going directly to the website, and the newsletter is playing a less important role in terms of driving traffic. While there's a significant readership from federal government, one of the things that we've always set out to do is ensure that those reading Innovation Aus are getting value from right across the ecosystem spectrum. So obviously state and federal government's important, but so are research, universities, capital, venture capital, private equity, government funding bodies, scale-ups, multinationals, all of those voices and all of those readers. It has been very intentional to build a horizontal readership. So you'll see that the top readers are federal government, but there is a broad range of readership, which is what we've tried to build over this last 9 years. We tried to talk, obviously, from a comms perspective. I see how different the landscape has changed over the years, and we've sort of put it into these buckets. New and emerging publications. There's a handful of new publications that pop up, and they take various forms. Some of them are podcasts, some of them are small daily news sites, and we like to see that there is a diversity kind of re-emerging into the publishing sector. Mainstream traditional media is becoming increasingly has less space for the types of things we write about. And I went to the Startup Muster report launch on Monday, and their data shows exactly that there's a slide of those mainstream publications in how much they're able to cover industry development and innovation. And those smaller publications are playing an increasing role. Public sector. There are some publications that are just focused more specifically on public sector. The Mandarin comes to mind, and technology and innovation. So some of those more traditional publications that really focused on that tech vendor case study space. I guess we kind of fit in a little bit of all of those. But if I'm looking at where we sit in the publishing landscape, that's how I see that it has changed, and where Innovation Oz plays a role that sort of touches on all of those things. Is there any questions at that point?
No questions in the Q&A box yet, Corey.
All righty. Anything else the editorial team or anyone else wants to say on our side?
I would just, if we're going into the editorial side, I know that we've got a question and answer period later, but I suppose when we launched, we were looking specifically at industry development issues, and that's something that we still do. We have our audience. We have, as Corey was saying, tried to have a horizontal impact, if you like. So policymakers at federal and state level should be able to read about companies doing interesting things, and companies in information technology will be, reading about companies doing circular economy recycling. So we're very, very much horizontal. We're not a startup publication, although we do occasionally report on startups. We, if we have a target audience among, the targets of those industry development policies, it's companies that have their own IP, real revenue, and generally an outlook to global markets. I guess we also cover everything from kind of critical minerals to digital transformation in government and space and everything in between. We would skew somewhat to information technology and digital, because that's where it's at right now, particularly in terms of government policy. But anyone who qualifies, we do skew towards deep tech and translation companies. Anyone that qualifies for an R&D tax incentive is generally something that we're kind of interested in. And very briefly, on a historical note, when we started in 2015, Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister. Industry policy in our area it wasn't an afterthought, but it certainly wasn't a priority. Malcolm Turnbull came in very shortly afterwards, and there was the Ideas Boom and National Innovation and Science Agenda, the NISA. So, we've been through a lot of iterations of this stuff. And today, I guess, today it's a completely different landscape. There's a lot more interest in the area. There's a lot more activity in deep tech. Startups, the notion of startups is now real and being pursued by a greater, proportion of school leavers and young professionals. There's a lot of returning capital from people who've gone overseas and made a lot of money in Silicon Valley and coming back. So, it's a pretty fertile environment that we're operating in. obviously, big tech is everything now. So all of the regulatory things around big tech and the media laws and privacy and encryption, all of those things are kind of front and center. We think, mainstream media very slow to get on top of this stuff. That's my view. But much more so now. But I would say that in what we do, we're still focused on like the local indigenous sovereign tech sector.
James, we do. Oh, sorry, Corey. I was just going to say, James, we have a question from Marina. Is there interest in reporting on reg tech, prop tech, fintech, i.e., more services sectors?
Look, I would say we're going to cover this in the Q&A, hopefully. But just a quick answer to that is, yeah, of course. Like, reg tech and fintech are obviously, there's a huge amount of activity in startup land. We find the stories that are of interest to us in terms of, regulatory stories are ones that will have a direct impact on the financials of a startup. So, like, we cover the things that ACMA or ACCC or ASIC do that would impact the way the company operates in Australia. Like that's bread and butter for us. But we also, we're interested in those local startup or technology companies that are doing something interesting that has an impact on the regulation as well. So I hope that answers.
Yes. Now I'm going to whiz through this next part. InnovationAus.com, as you know, Espresso Communications. I am calling it out because I know that there can be, when we started, it was laughable that a comms company would have a relationship with a publication. I don't think it's laughable anymore. And I think anyone that's sort of been in our sphere knows that Espresso and InnovationAus operate very differently, and our team on the comms side pitch to InnovationAus.com like any other comms company. That's absolutely essential to be taken seriously, and the only reason we were as a publication, and we would have been dead in 6 months if we didn't really focus on the perception and the practice and the proof in the pudding over a long period of time. So Innovation Advisory is obviously recent to us, but these two, the publication and Espresso, are different organisations under different leadership, and there's church and state. So I think that is a question that sometimes people don't ask, but might be in their minds. So we'll just call it out. Next slide.
Okay, this is me. Hi, everyone. As per Corey's introduction, I'm Kath, the Managing Director for InnovationAus.com. My role is really to oversee the commercial side of the business and help guide how we connect our clients' goals with production capabilities. So while the editorial team with James Justin at the helm really focus on delivering, high quality independent journalism, the production team sort of complements this by providing a big range of commercial services. So the team is fairly large compared to the reporting team. We have myself, a producer, project and events manager, project coordinator, a pool of external copywriters, and also a content lead who oversees quality control. And as you'll see in the following slides, which talks about some of the work that we have done, we've got the capability to produce a really big range of content types. And because of our size, which is a small to medium business, we can be quite agile and adaptable. So we're really well suited to deliver standard solutions, but also bespoke solutions that might be in line with a particular budget or objective. So we'll go into our medium production services in more detail, but we do events from small networking sessions to large scale forums, articles in terms of standard thought leadership, sponsored content, white paper reports, EDMs, social media campaigns, infographics, podcasts and multimedia content, case study videos, all that sort of thing. And, again, understanding that each one of our clients has unique objectives and constraints. So our process always starts with understanding budgets and goals, and then collaborating with you to determine the best content strategy to achieve those goals. So that's me. And now we're going to talk about some case studies, so some of the work that we have produced in the past. Corey, back to you. Oh, no, sorry, we're going to do a poll first. Leonard, if you wouldn't mind bringing up that poll first. So this is just, we're really keen to hear from you, from the audience. What are your biggest marketing and communications pain points? You can select as many as apply to you. Okay, and while we're going through that and you're popping in your answers, Corey, I'll just flip to the next slide.
Okay. We do the papers series once a year, which hopefully some of you have seen or have had your hands on. This is just one example of the Health Lift Out, which was like a glossy inside a more traditional paper. And this just gives a snapshot of the sort of execution of an event or a forum that we can do quite quickly. This was a print, but it also had an event component that we held at the State Library of Victoria, which was a beautiful room. And we actually did a progressive dinner so that people, different parts of the health sector could be, having facilitated conversation as they moved around the quadrants. I think it's like the Trivial Pursuit squares or, segments. But, that's part advertising online, the event component, and the contributed copy, things that will pitch to us as part of the paper series, but also partner content. So that's just gives you an idea that probably, people might not see, but gives an idea of the range of an execution that is a part editorial and part commercial. Again, I think one thing that's kind of tricky to explain about Innovation Oz is where we might be able to tackle projects for clients that are difficult to articulate properly via different forms of media. Going back to that horizontal conversation we had earlier, this was the X Prize competition, trying to drive entries as part of a global X Prize, and it was fighting fires from space. So that was with Minderoo Foundation, but looking at space as a driver of industry development, as the range of critical and emerging tech that fit into that space discussion, spotting fires with all sorts of like sensing devices and IoT, but then also talking about with Adam Gilmore joining, what that looks like from an Australian industry development perspective. So that there is a lot of ways to reframe a conversation around all of those things, including natural disasters and hazards. And so doing a bespoke webinar helped bring together that discussion, and there was a range of ways we could tell it, one through the webinar, but two through follow-up media that kind of broke apart those different parts.
I'll talk about this one. This is a case study that some work that we did with our client Verizon. That's the reason that we're presenting you this case study is that it really highlights our ability to amplify those key client messages using our extensive networking connections and content production expertise. So Verizon's priority was to emphasize AI security as part of its broader thought leadership strategy. So we had Chris Novak, who is Verizon's head of cybersecurity consulting, visit the region, and we identified some opportunities to leverage his expertise to create some impactful content. So the objectives were to showcase thought leadership in the topic, increase brand awareness, and also engage the local industry in a conversation about securing AI. So this is just a good example of our ability to sort of design a multi-format content approach centered around an interview with a visiting executive, which Chris was. So we were able to produce and deliver a podcast episode and an article, a thought leadership article. And also something important to mention is our ability to engage the third-party expertise. So to further strengthen content, we sourced Louise McGrath from AI Group as an industry expert and podcast guest. So, the AI Group representing the mid-tier industrial economy made Louise a really strong voice to broaden that conversation and add credibility. And that's something that we do regularly for clients is add that third party voice. So really connecting clients with sort of credible third party voices to enhance the messages. And embedding client expertise as well within macro industry trends to kind of ensure that relevance and impact, which really helps position from a thought leadership point of view.
2025, I think, is next. These are just kind of snapshots of various projects that we've done, digital twins. You can see the range of like ad specs, newsletter advertising, a lot of the kind of events that we host. Okay, precinct papers. This is the 4th year. You've seen example of the health papers in a previous slide. The reason why we're doing the precinct papers, we talked a lot about being horizontal. There is a lot of discussion about precincts, particularly in critical and emerging technologies in Australia. My view, our view, but definitely my view is a lot of the time those precinct discussions are coming out of parts of government that aren't specialising in technology. They're specialising in placemaking, transport, housing, property, infrastructure. And I think if we are building, common use infrastructure around things like semiconductors or quantum industries or biotech, medtech, precision medicine, that takes some intent and coordination of all of the things that bring together Innovation Oz's readerships, money, state, federal government, policies, as well as the people, the anchor tenants, which may be multinationals or they may be, parts of defence, as an example. So a lot of discussion about whether precincts are or not. Precinct is an old term. Yes, it probably is, but it's the one that's best understood. And I expect as we move through 2025, we'll tease out a lot of those discussions. But it's a good place for us to talk about things like, university research commercialisation. Where are we getting scale? Where are we getting international competitiveness with some of those focus areas? So it's always a working title. We'll stick to the title, but what it looks like will be very different. Call for papers will be open in Q1. There will be a component of that is partner content. And advertising opportunities within print. And I know a lot of clients haven't even thought about print in about 10 years. This could be an opportunity to bring back the smell of, newspaper again. But there's lots of different ways that's as a marquee project for 2025, it is editorial and partners, but it builds a body of work that's become a bit of a collector's item. You can buy the trilogy of the industry papers or the papers that have been done so far. And there's many people that have the 3 sitting on their desks as something to keep as a body of work. Innovation Oz Awards, I mentioned earlier that, we really try and do something different. This is the night of nights where we really let things, be really creative, and it's become known, I think, as a night where people have a lot of great fun, but it's about 500 people in the room. We always have very senior people in the room, plus our finalists, plus, a whole range of very senior people from across the sectors. And it's a great night. But it's a really important night because it reframes a lot of the stuff that hasn't necessarily been covered very well in deep tech areas specifically. It's a night of celebration, and I think it's a really important night in the annual program. And we work really carefully with other, organisations, like AmCham or South by Southwest, or to make sure that it sits nicely and it complements the other activities. And we are the go-to awards in our sector. Our partners include, the Tech Council and the Australian Computer Society. And we really see ourselves as the publication that sits at the heart of the sector, and those other organisations support us in bringing together that program. There's not a lot to say here, except we are looking at how we do it, over promise and under deliver, which is always like what kind of blue sky thinking does, is looking at how we better, given the diminishing media landscape with a lot of the more technology, business, government intersection, we're looking at Vendorland and how we add to Innovation Oz, which has been more policy focused, into something that's a bit more tech focused, looking specifically at the intersection of technology and government. I think one of the things we'd like to do out of this Q&A session, and maybe in some of the follow-up discussions with people who have joined, is find out exactly what would be valuable. I certainly know that from a tech perspective, there's fewer and fewer publications where you would be one, pitching, and two, reading about the technology side of things. And I know, Justin, that's your background in previous lives, and there has been a contraction there. I think it's important, and it's been very different from what we have done. And I do think there's a place in Innovation Oz, and that's something that we'll discuss further, and very interested in feedback about what that might look like. And we've obviously got some ideas from a publishing and editorial perspective, but that's why these conversations are very useful. So I've introduced James, I've introduced Justin. Joseph Brooks, you all know, and you also know Brandon Howe. So the team of four, we have James and Brandon are in the press gallery in Canberra. We have a bureau now. We're sort of building that out. Justin and Joe are Sydney based, with relatively frequent trips to Canberra, particularly around things like the budget. And I think we've kicked off with some indicative questions to get the discussion going, and then I'll hand over to facilitated Q&A. The first, and I'll put this to whoever wants to answer first, James or Justin, what should I be pitching to innovationoz.com if I wasn't the publisher?
Okay, well, I can talk about some of the practicalities, of pitching. And we're like many other publications. We take pitches in all forms. Majority these days I find come through email. I find less and less people pick the phone up to have a chat through things, which maybe is a bit detrimental. But yeah, email, phone, carrier pigeon if you must, whatever works for you. I try to keep on top of my inbox where I can, but there are invariably things that slip through the gaps. So follow-ups are helpful, but if you're following up 3, 4, 5 days after the fact, you probably be better placed spending your time on other things, because that's, as such, the news cycle, it moves on. So we're unlikely to come back to things 3 days after the fact. But in terms of practicalities, you contact any one of us. You can pitch freely to some of the subject experts, some of the people that have written previous stories on the topic that you might, you might be using a story as a reference to pitch. You can pitch directly to the reporters, or you can pitch directly to me. Or if email is your vice, then editor@innovationoz.com gets to everyone. So that's probably like the practical side of pitching. What should I be pitching? James, you kind of went through that in a bit of detail before. So maybe, did you have any more comments there?
We can be a bit of a strange organisation to pitch to. We take a huge, very broad set of stories. Our focus is obviously policy. Our focus is Australian industry. It doesn't mean that we don't report about technology or companies that come from overseas, but it's generally in the context of what problem it's solving here, or what partner is being used to deliver something specifically that aids the Australian industry. So it's quite niche. I'm just going to back up a little bit on Vendorland. That Vendorland we're thinking of as a podcast to start with. We're putting podcast facilities into our Parliament House office. We just think it's an advantage for us to have an office in Parliament House. It gives us good access to, obviously, ministers' offices and policymakers as they come through the building. But it's also opportunistically a great place to do interviews based on the back of people who are visiting the building, either as, not lobbyists, but coming in with their government relations people. So you have a very senior executives through the place. I would say with the Vendorland podcast, I'm just trying to find a way to cater to some of the bigger tech companies as an outlet for what would effectively be an enterprise or GovTech sort of publication. I see a lot of very senior people coming through from multinational companies, that like cybersecurity companies. Everyone's got their own general or admiral who talks cybersecurity on their behalf. If we have the recording studio at Parliament House, I want to find a way to get these people as they come through. So I would just keep it from a media pitching perspective. I would keep that in mind because it's always the most senior people who come through the building. So keep that in mind.
We have a question from Karen, and this is to both of you. Are you open to coffee meetings to discuss a broad set of angles with spokespeople, particularly public sector facing, and particularly if we haven't worked with you before?
I was going to say I'm open to coffee meetings. Obviously, time is finite in a day. But yeah, certainly happy to talk through angles, especially if it's broadly aligned with some of the things that James went through a little before. But yeah, always good to have a chat about it beforehand. Pick up the phone as a first step, and yeah, we can go from there for sure.
I would say the same thing. Yes, I'm open to coffee meetings. Time is a significant problem. Pick up the phone in the first instance. I think, particularly if you specified public sector facing, great. So as long as, like, I find a little bit of frustration in that, yes, we've got a slightly weird kind of editorial focus, or it's quite broad, but as long as you and your client kind of know what you want on the way in, it's a lot more helpful to us rather than trying to find out from us who we are and what we do, which is the purpose of this session.
I was going to say, hopefully there's some more questions, but what should I not be doing?
I can jump in. I got one current bugbear because it's the end of the year and things are quieting down. But prediction stories are my current absolute hate. Get so many pitches, and we just don't do that. I mean, if you'd looked at the site on any regular basis, you'd know that. So prediction stories, yeah, no, not really. Don't really have a place, I would say. And if I think about AI, no one really predicted the last 2 years. So, in a month's time, in 2 months' time, those predictions are usually out the window. So that would be my current one as of this week, because they've started coming through.
Merry Christmas. Here's some predictions. Okay.
We do have a question from Natasha. Apart from multinationals providing solutions to local government and industry, do you see a role for them in terms of commenting on current news cycles? Good question.
I mean, I would say yes, but I think the key word there is current. It has to be timely. So there's no point sending through a comment about a certain policy position that's been announced 2 days after it happens. We've moved on invariably. We do come back to these stories, but I think it's important to be just on top of what's happening and making sure your spokespeople are prepared to make comment. And we do include comment. Like there's last week with the R&D review, we included a whole bunch of comment from the sector. So it just has to be timely, basically.
I would just add to that. There is we run a lot of kind of thought leadership pieces, op-eds, opinion pieces. So yes, we do run that stuff. Yes, we also run it as effectively sponsored content or partner content. But if one of your clients has a view, then yeah, we do run that stuff outside of the paid editorial. I would just make the point though that if you're going to write an op-ed, you have to have a point of view. You have to have an opinion to be on an opinion page. So what I find quite a lot of the pitches we get might describe a situation and might in a hand-wringing sort of way, say, effectively say, isn't this terrible? Or, through a description of a situation rather than also having the next step, which is, here's what we can do about it. These are 3 steps. These are, here is a solution. So, those thought leadership pieces are quite powerful with us because, we have, so many government readers and readers in ministerial offices. So that's on the upside. But, we don't run a lot of them. So we want them to be sharp and actually controversial. They're not always controversial, but, you've got to have a view.
We have a question from Sucheta. Would you be open to accepting research or data from vendors that would potentially impact government services?
I would look. This is a tricky issue. Yes, of course, like good research is interesting, and we can build lots of stories out of that. Having said that, like so much, there is a lot of research that is just, it's marketing, and we can't use that. So it's got to be real. It's got to be credible. So I would say yes, but things like, there's so much cybersecurity research out there. We literally, we could drown them if we want to.
Yeah, I get half a dozen of those a day, and I almost always think they're compromised because they're sponsored. So the research isn't. It's kind of meaningless. So we generally take a rule of thumb where we don't accept, because it's hard to accept some and then not others. But like James said, we certainly try and keep across the research, and where it's possible, we'll include it as part of a broader story.
I would say also there's definitely research out there done by vendors that they make huge investments in. It's someone's passion project inside that organization. They're very often global, and they spill out some local data as well. Like those big longitudinal projects, yes, we do use that. But generally, like, oh my God, we get a lot of them, of the marketing type ones.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. Do you have any features or themes that you're keen to cover in 2025? And are op-eds ever taken on merit? And I think you've covered off the op-ed, so themes keen to cover in 2025.
I would, the one thing that I would say, and you don't want to like shoehorn your vendors, messaging. You don't want to bend things too much out of shape, but we do a lot of reporting on things like the NRF and the Industry Growth Program. There's a pretty solid set of government priorities at the federal level that are attached to the NRF and Industry Growth Program. Things like emerging technologies like quantum and AI and critical minerals is one. There's a bunch of different areas that they're very easy to find. So if stories that align with those priorities are good for us because we're focused on. But all that like AI, I think people are going to get burnt out with AI material. But the reality is everything is about AI these days. So there's going to be a lot of that in 2025, obviously. Cybersecurity, yes, again, hugely important. And yes, we'll be doing a lot of that. Anything big tech related in terms of the regulatory side, you will have noticed in the last year or so, in particular, the regulation of big tech has become a much bigger, more mainstream and more global story.
Keen for more questions, so please pop them in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'm just going to keep firing questions. We always tell people, clients, that there is no off the record. Is there off the record?
I don't like off the record, but I'll certainly have an off the record conversation if it leads to something down the line. But yes, I have off the record conversations. I prefer on the record, but you've got to work with what you've got.
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, it's just like a lot of the stuff we write about, governments can be quite vindictive. They don't like being criticised. So if you stick your head above the parapet, yes, you can get it blown off. So, we talk off the record. Very often I'll be writing columns that are, effectively opinion pieces. They're not my opinions. They're the opinions of others that I've spoken to that can't talk about something because they, because there's the potential for retribution from government. So, there's off the record, but like if you talk to your clients, and like all I would say is much prefer it on the record as a general rule. It should be on the record. If the client has a strong view on something, they should have the courage of their convictions. But we live in the real world, so there's a place for it.
So, do you think vendors, especially multinationals, this is from Lachlan, have adapted to cultural shifts in the APS that place a higher value on public capability than in the past?
Sorry, just
Say it again. Do you
yeah.
think vendors, especially multinationals, have adapted to cultural shifts in the APS that play a higher value on public capability than in the past? So this is probably less of a media question and more of a perception on maybe shifts in government, probably this government, I'm saying, Lachlan, with more of that kind of internal capability building. Give me a thumbs up if I'm on the right track. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I would say yes, because like these, like we can't generalize too much. Like each multinational has its own particular flavor and characteristics, but they are very, very adept at, morphing and adapting to different environments to make sure that they're still in the game. To be honest, though, I think the public service is still trying to catch up on the rhetoric about building more internal capability. So, like, we're having lots of loud conversations about it, but the public service itself, like, there is still a lag there. So, I'm just as an outside observer, and this is just an opinion, but it seems like pretty much business as usual. Yeah, there is one thing I want to say about multinationals. Like, we focus on Australian industry, and I think often some of the media reps think we do it at the exclusion of organisations that come from elsewhere. And yes, we focus on local industry and on the development of local industry, but we know the reality that we rely massively on technology from overseas. We always will rely massively on technology from overseas, and the multinationals play an enormous role in capability building in Australia for that reason. So, sorry, my long-winded point being that we're very interested, particularly in cases where it's gone through partners, and could be reseller partners, in capability building in the public service from tech coming from outside. Like, that is really interesting to me. Organisations like Microsoft, I don't know how many business partners they've got, but it would be in the tens of thousands, I would think. So, there's a huge role in that capability development for Australia that is driven directly by the hyperscalers and the other big technology service providers. So, I'm interested in that stuff. I tend not to get pitched much, but I am interested in that.
Yeah, I would, if I was to add one bit, I mean, I think I've noticed a shift in terms of, there's been a lot of focus on sovereign capability under the current government, and I have started to see, I've heard that some of the multinationals are at least attuned to that, and they are sort of more keen to talk up their sort of partner arrangements where they're working with the local sector there. So they are certainly, they're aware of it, and I think it is changing, but it's slow.
We've got some specific questions just about customer surveys and research. I think you talked a little bit about the research, but it's a blend of comms, like editorial and commercial. So probably we will take that offline. Other questions from
Sorry to interrupt, Paul. There's a question about background briefings. How do you guys feel about those, Justin and James? So background briefings on, I suppose, particularly vendor research reports and angles and spokespeople and that sort of thing.
Look, I would just say, I mean, it would be a case by case thing, and generally, the reporters are, we're all busy. I'm not saying that we're busier than anyone else. I know everyone's busy, but it's an investment of time, and sometimes that time is short. So it's just a case by case thing.
Yeah, I would say more likely to have background briefings with government officials rather than companies. But yeah, I mean, we have done them, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, and to be honest, if it's like, when I say case by case, like, happy to take it. Like, if it's a new area, it's interesting. It has, a big potential impact in the area that we talk about, and that we get an email with 3 or 4 dot points saying, we want to talk to you about this, this, and this, and it's important because of this. Like, then you can make the decision about whether to invest the time.
Or there's some complexity and it needs to be explained, would be the other one, I would say.
Can I ask a question? We're kind of not, I mean, back in the day where case studies were a thing that used to get published in entirety, but, examples of, I guess, companies that have grown or not grown, or doing new things and applying technology and innovation and new research into different ways. What's your view on how, one, is there a place, and 2, how should someone be communicating that to you?
Look, I mean, just to go back to the this new product we're talking about, Vendorland, that will exist as a podcast, and then a section on the Innovation Oz website to start with. But I can absolutely see case studies in that publication. No, seriously, when Corey was saying earlier, we're seeking feedback on this. Like, what would that look like? This publication that looks at government tech or enterprise tech, and the big kind of big transformation programs. That's what I'm trying to build, and we are dead keen to get feedback. What would you like to see in it?
Can I chip in here, even though it's not editorial, but it does kind of give a picture of the site? One thing I do think is, because we tend to be much more focused on a lot of the government announcements, reports, Senate estimates, inquiries, consultations, there can be a rhythm of things that come out of government that don't necessarily have answers. They might be perceived as negative or not positive, or we have a chunk of things that happens around the awards of profile pieces of all the finalists, which tends to bring some of that richness of what's actually happening out there. I think my view is, and I hope Justin and James agree, I'd like to see more of that year round. I think we've got a view that if you're writing a story about a company that's doing really great things with new knowledge, Department of Industry, Department of Environment, Department of whatever it is, probably never get out and see those things. And when they're talking about policy, it's often in a vacuum. So how do we paint that picture? And that might be in a range of different forms, and I know it certainly is on the commercial side. But James, Justin, on the editorial side?
In terms of like profile type pieces?
Yeah, like profile pieces. Like, I know over the years there have been, comms companies that have got in touch about, a new sort of technology application that it's now become quite mainstream and we understand it well. But when it was originally pitched to us, it was kind of new territory.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to go into next year doing more of that, because I think what we do around the awards is really great and you get to see some amazing stuff that's going on. But it is kind of confined to that sort of 3 to 4 month period. I would like to do more during the year, and we'll definitely be looking to do that. with time constraints and all that as well on the side, but definitely want to do more of that. I would say though, like product stuff, we don't tend to cover. So it has to be more around R&D and what they're building as a company. There's some really great stuff going on in Sydney right now in that space. I know in Queensland as well. Just want to get an idea of, how we're moving forward. So that would be my only sort of addition there, is like, we're not super product focused, as you'd be aware if you read the site. But we are interested in what companies are doing and how they fit in with the broader picture around exports and capability building.
We just had a question from Sucheta again. Is Vendorland paid?
Or, I mean, it would be a standard kind of publication model, like podcasts. We would like to have it sponsored, but as far as it's not paid subscriptions, I don't think so. I think we'll be
We're
open.
still working on the commercial model, but we're still working on the commercial model. I think it wouldn't necessarily be pay to play, but it does have to be commercialized. So
Yeah,
that's a very vague answer.
I would say I don't like pay to play sites. I think they're no good. So no, it's not going to be that. But obviously, it needs to be commercial. We need to put food on the table and whatnot.
I think we've got time for one more, Kath.
Yep. We have one more from Natasha. What works and what doesn't in terms of visiting executives when you're invited to speak with C-levels or VPs visiting Australia to consult with enterprise and government customers? So what do you want to hear when you have visiting VIPs?
I might chip in. I would say I find with international execs, they rarely know what's going on at a sort of a minuscule level, I guess, and that's to be expected, given their global status. So I would say international execs that can talk to the Australian context are really valuable, and who know what's going on. I find I will chat to them more than, say, just a general conversation with someone about, the broader ecosystem somewhere else. I find it's better to have those conversations with someone who knows what's going on. So I do find myself gravitating towards Australian execs where possible. But yeah, those execs who can talk to the Australian context are valuable.
I would add to that. I think as much as we're all cosmopolitan, urbane, global thinking people, Australia is an island. We don't always know what's going on off the island as well as we might. So I do think, depending on the seniority of the executive and what their speciality is, any exec that brings not just a global view, but fresh thinking in an area that Australia has not kind of moved on, because that covers our sort of policy interests, but it there's usually a different view from elsewhere. So I'm just to think of something. I guess, I mean, there is cybersecurity stuff and all of that, but if there was definitely if there was an executive with a multinational who's working with defense innovation in the US and could speak to, defense opportunities from AUKUS. I mean, that's like the perfect storm of interest for me. So, we live in a world that's increasingly bound together through, our comms and big tech and all of those things, but also increasingly kind of fractured between geopolitical blocks, and all of those things are fascinating. So, and that usually takes an outsider's view, to be honest. We can work out our role within it, but those very senior, deep thinking execs who have a global view are important for us.
I think we're at time. Look, thank you, everyone. Taking an hour out of your day just before Christmas, even if you are eating lunch at your desk. Really, delighted that you could join us, and editor at innovationoz.com will get you to the whole editorial team. I think hopefully one of the things, apart from some practical advice and background and context, is the fact that we really are like open to feedback, ideas, suggestions. We do tend to be head down, bum up, but hopefully this is the first of many conversations. And I am going to say thank you from all of us here, and have a fantastic Christmas and New Year, and get a well-deserved break, and looking forward to chatting in 2025. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
And just to add as well, if there are any questions that got popped in the chat or the Q&A that didn't get answered, we'll definitely come back to you via email to address those. Thanks, everyone.